Which AFC quarterback should you be buying this offseason? We'll tell you in this edition of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we are recapping the AFC South. What a bad division. From the 2024 season, we're going to be looking ahead to 2025, telling you the players to buy, sell, and maybe keep an eye on as sleepers. But let's start with the quarterbacks, Kate, because I think all of these quarterbacks in this division, outside of Will Levis, are a little bit undervalued right now. But of the three quarterbacks that we like, which quarterback are you buying the most?
Let's talk about Trevor Lawrence, who, just got a brand new head coach, brand new shoulder, got that off-season shoulder surgery just to take care of some of those nicks and bumps and bruises that he has picked up over the past couple of years. Honestly, hasn't been great, but I can't get over wanting to buy Trevor Lawrence with the dip in value that he's seen, knowing that Liam Coen is going to come in to this offense. He's going to have more of a true modern day offense. And guess what? That price tag for Trevor Lawrence has continually slipped. You know who's being ranked well ahead of Trevor Lawrence in the most recent batch of Dynasty Startup ADP?
There are quite a few guys. Dak Prescott, Anthony Richardson, Bryce.
Okay, yeah,
Young.
but those are understandable. Sam Darnold, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix. Marcus, what are we doing?
This is one that I don't get either. I understand why people are down on Trevor Lawrence. The production has not been as good as the hype. And now he's been dealing with some injuries. He had a concussion earlier in the year. He's coming off a major shoulder injury. So there are some reasons to be worried here. And then you look at the price and it's it's quarterback 23, right? And it's like, okay, come on, that's just silly. And it's not like this team doesn't have weapons, right? Like Brian Thomas Jr., go look at the latest batch of ADP, one of the most valuable assets in all of Dynasty football. Christian Kirk, who missed most of the season, expected to be back. They have Gabe Davis. He doesn't really count. Evan Ingram will be back. Like, this is a pretty good cast of weapons around Trevor Lawrence. And if Liam Coen is as good as we think he is, this could be an offense that goes from one of the worst in the NFL to top 10, top 12. I think that's pretty realistic.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a quarterback who, again, kind of struggled in 2024. I think there was a really good reason that the team moved on from their GM, from their head coach, even if, maybe the GM part took a little bit longer than it should have. But I don't think that this was a modern enough offense that was utilizing the weapons that they had to the degree that they could. And Liam Coen coming in, going to do, I think, some more trick plays, get some favorable positions for your offensive weapons. That's going to help Trevor Lawrence. Coming off a year where surprisingly threw for a career high 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Didn't have all of that great a year, but I think we know that the traits are there. The physical traits, the physical gifts are there. Now, I think, honestly, the biggest concern for me, it's the mismatch, I think, in value for, his dynasty value right now versus how I feel like we should be looking at. I think it just has a lot to deal with the fact that, this was a guy who was labeled a generational prospect, a can't miss prospect. And when you hype up a player that much, and you give them their flowers before they've been earned. Yeah, that's true. And he hasn't been the guy to transform that offense, right? He hasn't been the guy to just come in, year one and change the landscape of how we view the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I also think there have been so many extraneous factors here
I mean, he
that
did take them to a playoff. Well, they beat the Chargers in a playoff game, one of the
that was
biggest
a wild
comebacks we've
game.
ever saw. Yeah, and they almost beat the Chiefs in Kansas City. Now, again, I know that was during the 2023 season, and they took. Oh no, sorry, 2022, 2023. They were what? They were 8-3 before Lawrence got hurt, and they were the number one seed in the AFC, and then the bottom fell out. So, like, it hasn't been that long that they were a really good team. It just feels like that after how bad the 2024 season was.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, before this season, Trevor Lawrence notched back-to-back seasons with 4,000 plus passing yards.
Yeah.
Like, I
No.
feel like that's probably an underrated aspect of his game. Also, I think the rushing floor, generally speaking, kind of underrated with Trevor Lawrence. We'll see how that continues.
I hope it goes down, to be honest with you. I think for his sake, rushing less would probably be better.
Maybe, but I also I think, part of his like size and component, like I do think that's not integral to his game, but I think it's a part of it. But as a rookie, 334 rushing yards, sophomore, 291, third season, 339. We saw a dip, but averaging 4.69 yards per attempt over the course of his career. That's a pretty nice rushing floor that, like, again, it's not additional production that you're going to like bank on every single week, but that's a solid enough floor that with the upside I think he has as a passer when healthy in a favorable system, like I think we're definitely underrating Trevor Lawrence here. Now, you mentioned you're
I would
not
buy all
all
these
in on
quarterbacks. That's all I was going to say. I was going to ask you, like, of these next group, Anthony Richardson, C.J. Stroud, who would you rather buy between those two quarterbacks? Because again, I think I'm buying all three, but of those two, which one are you more interested in?
I think the biggest question is like, what is the state of your dynasty team? So CJ Stroud, I think, is going to be a perfect QB2, right? He's a guy that I think he's the franchise guy. I think Houston's going to be committed to CJ Stroud. I still think, despite a massive downturn in production, like I think he's a good quarterback. And I think what we saw in his rookie season is much closer to what we're going to see in the average of his career than it is, what we saw in his second campaign. So, like, you want a floor play. I think CJ Stroud's going to have a pretty safe floor over his career. He's going to rely on efficiency as a passer in order to get that fantasy production. But if you're relying on him as your QB2, hopefully you didn't buy in at QB1 prices when he was valued in the top 5, right? But Anthony Richardson, QB18 in Dynasty Startup ADP right now.
So here's my thoughts on Anthony Richardson. We were completely out when he was being valued as QB6, QB7, QB8. Like, just way too high.
Mm-hmm.
But a QB18, 150th overall, that's when I'm interested, especially in these one quarterback leagues where upside is all that really matters, right? I am interested. No, I don't think I would buy though now because I want to see what happens in free agency. And I think there's a chance that once free agency happens and they sign, I'm trying to think of a quarterback they could sign that would threaten his value a little bit, but wouldn't be an outright starter ahead of him. Like if they signed Jameis
like
Winston.
What quarterbacks do you think would kind of complement his play style that they could integrate with the same type of playbook? Because I don't think it's Kirk Cousins.
Justin Fields.
Ooh.
But see, now I think that would take a big hit on his value because there might just be a chance that Fields is further along as a passer. But I'm thinking if they sign someone like Jameis Winston this offseason, that wouldn't scare me off from drafting Anthony Richardson, but I think it might scare off other people because we've seen what Winston can do before. I just think once we get Justin Fields on a team, Russell Wilson on a team, we get two quarterbacks like Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, you're going to have Anthony Richardson being drafted as QB19, QB20.
Yep.
And that's where I want to buy in, a 22-year-old in an offense I still think has a lot of talent going into year 3. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it does, now you have somebody that can actually make a difference on Sundays in your fantasy lineups.
I mean, yeah, the upside is huge. We've seen him be a fantasy relevant quarterback despite, I mean, there were a lot of ups and downs this year. I think the biggest shock for a lot of people was that the floor was not nearly as safe as maybe we would have projected, but we've seen the upside, and the upside is like top 5 performance any given week, even when the play on the field is about as ugly as it can possibly get. So like, I still do think that there's something there. I think there's physical raw talent. I wasn't in at that high price, but it feels like we're entering the buy window for Anthony Richardson.
All right, Kate, let's talk about some players that we're trading away from the AFC South. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. And if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. Pair that with one other correct pick, and you are cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board, and I'm taking even more on Travis Kelce receiving yards. I just think he's going to have a big game. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to pepper him with targets. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are breaking down the AFC South from the 2024 season, looking ahead to 2025. Kate, which players from this division are you trying to trade away this offseason?
Travis Etienne Jr., come on down, and then get out. Get off my dynasty team. I need you to get out right now, because I've never seen a player with a more screaming sell low tag than Travis Etienne. There was one point where he was valued as like a top, 6, 7, 8 dynasty running back. And, he had the draft capital. He was paired with a good quarterback who, again, hasn't necessarily panned out. Maybe you can see some intrigue in the fact that, like, we saw a lot of running backs who had a lot of talent that maybe didn't reach their peak of their careers with their first NFL team because they were stuck on kind of a bad offense. And they're flourishing now, right? Like, we've seen Saquon Barkley flourish. We've seen Josh Jacobs flourish, but we haven't seen nearly the type of flourishing, like at least Saquon Barkley with the Giants. We still saw Saquon Barkley. We just didn't see Saquon Barkley as often as we did. We still saw flashes of Josh Jacobs with the Raiders. We knew what type of player he was.
The NFL rushing yards and scrimmage yards, right?
Yeah, like we still saw that. We just didn't see those flashes as consistently when they were playing on bad offenses. How often do you watch Travis Etienne and say, wow, he looks like Travis Etienne?
Yeah, not very often. Now, here's the part that I'm just going to empty my thoughts here. Number one, I think whatever GM the Jags hire to replace Trent Baalke is going to have to do a lot of cleaning up, right? Trent Baalke was kind of a disaster when it came to building this roster, and there was a lot of guys out there that he paid that didn't deserve to be paid, like a Gabe Davis. I think Christian Watkins. I think Christian Kirk is a good player, but I think maybe they overpaid a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if Travis Etienne, who's going into the final year of his deal, is somebody they move for 80 cents on the dollar just to try to free up some cap space and open up space for Tank Bigsby, who I'll get to in a second. I also wanted to ask, do you think there's a chance that Travis Etienne in Liam Coen's offense is just a much better player than what we saw from him in Doug Peterson's offense?
I mean, I think the entirety of the offense is going to be better under Liam Coen, but I think what gives me the most pause about Travis Etienne, and I'm going to liken this to the Bucks actually. So we kind of looked at Rachaad White and we said, all right, well, he's used a lot as a receiver because they can't get the efficiency going on the ground. They have
Yeah.
offensive line problems, yada, yada, right? And then Bucky Irving appears. And you realize when you see both of these players playing within the same offensive system and you see the difference between those two, I think that was the aha moment where we were like, oh, Rachaad White actually sucks. Like there was that moment of, oh, Bucky Irving looks so good. And I have never seen Rachaad White look as good as Bucky Irving did.
No.
Now, Tank Bigsby was a guy that I was very intrigued by coming into his rookie season. Didn't pan out, but there's not a single metric I can find that Tank Bigsby didn't kind of crush Travis Etienne in this past season. He made that second year leap, outpaced him, missed forced tackle rate, yards after contact per attempt, first down touchdown rate on rush attempts, yards per carry, averaged 4.6 yards per carry to Travis Etienne's 3.7. And it's not like that 3.7 was an outlier here for
No.
Travis Etienne. He's largely been efficient throughout his entire career. So I have to wonder, like I think this is just Travis Etienne, right? At 3.8 yards per carry in 2023, 3.7 this year. He has not delivered on the expectations that we had, point blank.
And I keep coming back to, okay, well, they'll just trade him, right? Somebody's going to be interested in Travis Etienne, and maybe that's the case. Now, his cap number's a little higher than I think most teams would want to pay for a running back. On top of that, Kate, we keep mentioning it. This is an awesome running back class. Most scouts and decision makers are saying, like, this is like two running back classes combined in one group. So is a team that needs a running back going to want to part away with, let's say, a 4th round pick for ETN and pay him $7 million a year when you could just draft a running back in round 4 that's 4 years younger, 5 years younger? It might be more effective and efficient. I don't know. I do think ETN gets traded. I just wonder, is he going to go into a situation that's better than what he is now? Probably not. And that's why you and I are both saying that we're not opposed to trading him away. He's being drafted, ranked as RB 26, just inside of the top 100. If you can flip him for, I don't know, a player like Trey Benson, Tony Pollard, Zach Charbonnet, I think you do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and Marcus, you mentioned like the idea that, okay, there's probably going to be some GM that, like, most GMs theoretically would look at the running back class and say, like, okay, I'll save my draft pick, I'll save my cap space here, and I'll just go draft one of those guys. We know that, like, rational GMing is not something we can always assume here.
No.
There is a reason that bad teams stay bad. A lot of times that has to do with ownership. It has to do with poor decisions on the behalf of the GM. I think, I'm not going to assume that anybody's smart enough to pass on Travis Etienne at this point. And, like, I don't know if he goes to a poor situation, like, I don't know what if I just don't know what even a second contract looks like for Etienne at this point. I believe the talent is still there. I still think he's a talented dude. I just don't think he's really looked the part of the guy we thought we were getting.
No, and maybe I could be drawn back in the right team, in the right situation. I just don't even know what that is yet. Like, I think we'd have to go through all 31 other teams and try to find a good landing spot, and it's probably going to be pretty small. My guess is that there will be a team out there that's just looking to get a viable running back before the draft, so they're not forced to draft a running back or overdraft a running back. But as of right now, as we stand here on February 4th, I can't recommend him as a buy. Let's talk, Kate, about some sleepers that we like from this division going into 2025. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Are you looking for tickets for your next big event? Maybe last minute tickets to the big game next week, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game. finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all of the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste your time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for, a long time now. And here's why I love it. They get you the absolute best deals. They show you the pricing up front so you know exactly what you're going to pay, so you're not surprised at checkout. Plus, the seat view is an absolute game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seats are going to look like in the venue. It is so reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. And if you find a better deal elsewhere, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to take your next event to the next level? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, 2 of our AFC South hosts. So go check them out. Available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kate, let's talk about some sleepers from this division. Who do you got?
I think we should just talk about a team. Let's talk about the Colts wide receivers. Yeah. So we talked a lot about the potential upside of the Colts. If Anthony Richardson can get it together, he's a potential value. But I do think part of that has to extend to what I think is a pretty deep receiving core. Now, my favorite buy happens to be Josh Downs. You're targeting Alec Pierce. So I feel like people understand the argument to buy into Josh Downs. He has some solid draft capital. I think he has probably what's considered a safer floor for fantasy. Tell us about why you're buying into Alec Pierce specifically. We know the upside's there. He was fantasy relevant at times this season. Can you trust it moving forward?
Well, first of all, he's the cheapest of the 4 receivers in this offense, right? Between Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, A.D. Mitchell. And yet he had 824 yards and 7 touchdowns last year, averaging 22 yards per catch. And there should have been some even bigger receptions in there, a couple that got called back because of penalties, holdings. He's only 24. And it's just not often, Kate, that we see receivers that are this good down the field. For his career, he's averaging over 17 and a half yards per reception. He's got great size. He's got great athleticism. Whether it's with the Colts or somebody else, I just think he is a starting outside receiver in the NFL that is being drafted outside of the top 75 receivers right now. I like him. I just think he's a good player.
He is a good player. And the thing is, like, he has found kind of the perfect role. Like, what I always envisioned for him coming out of Cincinnati was that he was going to have this role along the outside where he can be a bona fide deep threat. Now, that's not always going to lead to the most consistency. We saw that this year. 824 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, did have 4 interceptions on targets to Alec Pierce, had a 53.6
stat.
Yeah, that's fair. But, part of that is the fact that these are some of the lower probability completions. He's getting these targets deep down the field. And he's not getting as many targets. He had 69 targets to Josh Downs 107 and finished with more receiving yards. Now,
okay, let me tell you this. Here's this is gonna be fun. I think Alec Pierce is George Pickens with worse PR. Right? You look at George Pickens' numbers this year: 900 yards and 3 touchdowns, 12 total touchdowns from George Pickens in 3 years. Meanwhile, Alex Pierce is right around the same numbers every single year. I mean, I just think they're not that different in terms of players, and yet one's being drafted as wide receiver 80 and the other one's being drafted as wide receiver 20.
I think that's fair. I think the biggest difference for me is that, like, George Pickens, I think in an ideal situation where he's fully healthy for a full 17 games, he's going to see more than 69 targets. Like, in general,
But he's also not reliable, though. That's the other thing. Not only health-wise, it's like he could be traded at any moment, or he could just not show up to the stadium at time at any moment. Again, I'm not saying that Pierce should be valued ahead of Pickens. I'm saying I just don't see that big of a difference between the two players.
And I mean that they kind of, I think, have that similar skill set where you're going to be in awe when you see some of the deep balls that they can come down with. But that's why I think maybe Josh Downs is the answer. He does get more targets, right? He gets more of those high probability completions that are going to yield generally more production. Josh Downs, 2.3 yards per route run to Alec Pierce's 1.9 this past season. Saw 31.1% of team target share to Alec Pierce's 16%. Generated more separation. I think that's just because of in part the role. He's a good route runner. Like, I think if you need, honestly, you could probably have both of these guys on your roster. Maybe it's not a either or. Maybe it's you could reasonably afford to trade for or draft both of these guys, because I do think their role in the offense is so different. Josh Downs going to be more of that chain mover. Alec Pierce is going to be the guy that opens up the offense with some of those deep ball skills and running further down the field, and making those big plays. Like, they are different enough that I think both of these guys can have success in this offense long term. And I do think that both of them are pretty talented players. So maybe we're just arguing against ourselves for no reason.
Doesn't it feel, though, like, Kate, one of these receivers between Pittman, AD Mitchell, Downs, and Pierce is going to get moved this offseason, and it's probably not going to be Downs. It's probably not going to be Mitchell after spending a second-round pick. Pierce is going into the last year of his contract, so maybe teams snoop around a little bit. The Colts also just traded Pittman. Like, I just have a feeling that one of these guys is going to get moved because they just have too much talent at the wide receiver position for one of them to not get some kind of value back.
I mean, it would probably make sense.
Let me give you a trade. Like, if the Patriots came calling and said, "Hey, we'll give you a second-round pick for Michael Pittman right now. We can't get the receiver that we want in round one, but we've got to get Drake May a better weapon." Do you think the Colts would be interested in that? They'd be like pick 36 or something.
I think they'd probably. There's some dead cap. There's a decent amount of dead cap associated with Michael Pittman. So I think that's probably my biggest concern. $23 million because he just got paid last year. They might have.
That's also why you're getting a second-round pick, though.
Yeah. I think that would make
something's going to happen.
If you're erring in the side of the youth movement. I mean, Michael Pittman, he's 27 years old. He's not like old, but if coming off a season where he dealt with a back injury, if you have concerns about that, I could see Pittman being the guy that
I'm convinced that something is going to happen this offseason because they want to get Pierce more involved in the offense, or maybe they ship Pierce out for more draft picks so that they can get Downs and AD Mitchell on the field. I'm just convinced something's going to happen with this wide receiver core. So we're not going to have all four of these guys competing for targets in 2025.
Fair.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We'll see you back here on Wednesday when we're recording with Matt Williamson. Check out the show then.